Chapter 31 of Resurrections, Part 1. Twilight's heart pounded in her chest as she navigated the dark halls of the spire. She remembered the path to Shaper's chamber well. Her hooves moved as if on their own, between warm, glowing crater and chilling black crystal, ceaselessly drawing her closer to what felt very much like a final confrontation. Shaper. The source of the corruption that brought Equestria to its knees and led directly to the deaths of millions of innocents. And there she was, trotting straight into his lair while cursed crystal ponies scraped through the shadows and leered after her, bringing him exactly what he needed to break free. Twilight glanced to her side, where Princess Luna floated in a gently tinkling aura of red-tinted lavender. The alicorn was still curled up tight, chest swelling with every peaceful breath, and ugly red tears stained into her cheeks. It was strange to see such a majestic figure, adorned with the regalia of her position, with her nose tucked under her tail like a napping foal. Helpless. Twilight turned her gaze forwards again, and tried not to think about the very distinct possibility that she was about to cause a second apocalypse.
This is not the time for doubts, little flower.
Midnight walked close beside her, opposite Luna.
The decision is made. Now we act. But what if we made the wrong decision?
Twilight bit her lip as she ducked under a protrusion of sharp black crystal and started up a narrow, winding stairwell. Midnight sneered.
Then we make it with confidence.
Twilight grimaced. The idea of making the wrong decision was nauseating enough on its own, but doubling down on it without so much as even questioning an alternative made her stomach churn. She felt like she was taking a final exam consisting of a single, long, multi-stage question. If she got the first part wrong, then everything that followed would fall apart as well.
We have our plan,
Midnight said reassuringly.
Do not second-guess yourself.
Twilight took a deep breath. The oppressive aura of the spire pushed against her shield and made her horn throb as they walked down the final hallway. She could hear Shaper's thralls watching her as she crossed the threshold. They shuffled around in the unnatural darkness, crystal bodies scraping against crystal floor, but she kept her gaze focused forwards on Shaper's frozen form occupying the center of the chamber.
You were not lying.
Shaper sounded intrigued, perhaps even surprised. The thralls began to edge forwards, their dead gemstone eyes focused on Luna like twinkling stars bobbing in the periphery of Twilight's vision.
We can feel the seed inside her. It is...
He paused for a moment, before releasing a deep sigh.
Tantalizing.
We have done as you requested,
Midnight said, her voice imposing and stern.
Fulfill your end of the bargain.
And we are to work our most valued magic while you clutch your princess within your shield like a precious fool?
Shaper asked.
Set her down.
Twilight hesitated, glancing to Midnight.
How can we be sure that you won't try something?
You doubt the word of the king?
The shadows flickered and stretched around them, Shaper's voice rumbling with anger.
Set her down, or there shall be no exchange.
We do no such thing while our only guarantee is the promise of a 1,000-year-old pretender.
Midnight spat. She glanced at the watching thralls, who were creeping closer with an eerie slowness, leaning intently forwards.
Dismiss your servants. They're no longer necessary.
You fear you cannot fend off these mindless thralls?
Shaper mocked. There was a long moment where he said nothing, his voice bouncing off the cavernous crystal walls before fading into a quiet buzz.
What if he says no?
Twilight pursed her lips, trying to get a count on the horde of crystal ponies surrounding them, but only the very closest were visible in the darkness.
He will not,
Midnight said confidently.
A starving dog will do anything for a mouthful of meat. Did you just refer to the princess's meat?
Very well,
Shaper snapped. By some imperceptible signal, the crystal ponies shuffled into motion, their dozens of hooves scraping against the floor in a deafening cacophony. The seconds dragged on into minutes, Twilight quietly counting the silhouettes gliding past. There were so many, and she was acutely aware that the ones she saw were just a fraction of the total. She was just passing 50 when the last one stumbled past her. Twilight followed it with her gaze as it stepped over the huge fallen doors and out into the chamber before vanishing into the darkness.
That should be sufficient.
The annoyance in Shaper's voice was sharp enough to cut steel.
Now present the princess to us. There is no more cause to stall.
Taking a deep breath, Twilight floated Luna forwards, past the protective glow of her shield, and set her onto the chipped crystal floor. Immediately, the shadows rushed in, appearing to leap off of the ground and split into tendrils of wispy, viscous smoke. They moved with uncanny speed, pouncing onto Luna's sleeping form and slithering across her body before Twilight could react.
What are you doing?
Twilight demanded.
This is unexpected.
Shaper spoke quietly, an intrigued confusion tinting his voice.
We feel her darkness, but it does not respond to us. As if it is asleep.
The dark tendrils dissipated just as quickly, the surrounding shadows going still once more.
Explain where you found this specimen.
We found her in the Everfree Forest,
Twilight said.
We think she put herself into a coma to stop the corruption from developing, but it was still active when we found her. We defeated it in combat,
Midnight added triumphantly.
Perhaps it is still wounded from our battle.
No,
Shaper said curtly.
It is not merely diminished, but utterly unresponsive. We cannot feed on this darkness.
What? That's not possible.
Twilight shook her head, brow furrowing.
It nearly killed us. If we hadn't locked it in... Oh. What? The reason it feels like it's asleep to him is because it is asleep.
Twilight grimaced, a nervous knot forming in her gut.
We never beat it, Midnight. Luna locked herself in a dream where it couldn't get to her, but then we let it straight into that dream. And it's been stuck there ever since.
She plopped back onto her haunches, mind racing.
And for all we know, it's been corrupting her there the entire time. Because we let it into the one place Luna did so much to keep it out of. Oh no. What if I ruined everything? Then we will fix it. There is no point in fussing over a mistake before we're certain it occurred.
Midnight's calm voice washed over her like a soothing wave.
If we let it to Luna's sanctum, then surely we can lure it back out. Maybe? I don't know. For all we know, there might not even be anything of Luna left. Or it may not be interested in chasing us. And we can't just go dream walking in the middle of Shaper's territory. He could do anything to us while we're vulnerable. He would not jeopardize a prize as precious as this. If he needs us to extract her darkness, then we'll be safe.
What is it?
Shaper inquired. Nodding to herself, Twilight stood and faced him once more.
We think we know how to bring her corruption out for you to access, but we'll have to enter her dreams to do so.
Shaper hummed thoughtfully.
If this is a trick, we will ensure you regret it.
No tricks.
Twilight said firmly.
And we trust you will not attempt to harm us in our sleep.
Midnight added.
Without us, you will never obtain Luna's darkness.
Shaper chortled, the sound making the crystal vibrate under Twilight's hooves.
Such a weary mind. Fret not, equestrian. So long as we have need of you, you are safe within our halls.
This isn't exactly how I'd imagined things going,
Twilight said, gently pulling Luna back into the protection of her shield and laying down beside her.
You cannot predict all outcomes, little flower. Luckily, you have me.
Midnight smirked down at her, then looked to the glowing lavender shield surrounding them.
The shield will remain for a time while we sleep, but not long. And we may not be able to wake immediately if the petty king tries something. Time moves faster in dreams.
She rested her head on Luna's side, listening to the gentle sound of the princess's breathing as her chest rose and fell.
And fights with fearsome monsters are usually over pretty quick anyway. All fights are over quickly when we are involved.
Twilight couldn't help but smile a little at her other half's confidence as she closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. She held it for 5 seconds, pushing the many concerns of the waking world aside before slowly exhaling. Like last time, when Luna's weird had pulled her unawares into the realm of dreams, the transition was barely perceptible. It was like watching the clouds shift as she floated down a gentle stream, the water tickling at her ears and tugging at her mane. If she wasn't paying attention, she might miss the moment where the current pulled her from one path onto another. But with the right training, she could feel the sensation of sinking into slumber, and even influence where the undertow took her. An icy gust blasted across her muzzle. Blinking her eyes open in shock, she found herself surrounded by a thick sheet of whirling white. The snow crunched against her hooves as she stood, the howling gale buffeting her, first one way, then another. She could see barely a few steps in front of her. The cold pierced her coat and wormed its way into her bones. She turned in a circle in search of guidance and spotted Midnight crouched wearily beside her, her lips pulled back into an irritated snarl.
This is not like last time,
she hissed, tail flicking behind her.
Dreams usually aren't.
Twilight shouted over the wind as she trudged forward, squinting against the flurry.
Where are you going?
Midnight called, slogging after her.
Wherever my hooves take me!
The wind shifted, nearly knocking Twilight off balance, and with a huff of annoyance she summoned a weather circle around her. A faint lavender sparkled that was discernible only because of the way the wind and snow parted and weaved around it.
And why didn't you start with that?
Midnight grumbled beside her. Twilight ignored the comment, scanning side to side as they walked. What little she could see of the landscape was plain and rocky, a thick blanket of snow draped over scattered stones, with only the naked trunks of dead trees to break the monotony. Where was this place? Where was Luna's weird? And where was Luna herself?
Look, up ahead.
An indistinct shadow took shape before them. At first, it almost appeared to be the silhouette of a pony, with a bobbing horn and muzzle just discernible at one end, but she couldn't make out a body or legs. The snow seemed to twinkle around it, little motes swirling and dancing as they followed the shape. Then the shadow shifted, and Twilight realized it wasn't a pony. It was 2 ponies, one much smaller than the other. Twilight quickened her pace, the freezing air searing her lungs. She guessed she was about 10 paces away from the strange ponies when the wind suddenly stilled for a brief moment, the whirling snowdrifts fluttering down to the earth. And she found herself looking into the curious blue gaze of Princess Luna. She stumbled to a stop, opening her mouth to call out some hasty greeting, only to realize that it wasn't the Princess Luna she knew. This Luna was small, about the size of one of the Comrade Crusaders, and instead of an ethereal mane of stars, there were plain locks of pale blue framing her foolish face. Even her cutie mark was absent, with only a smattering of black fur on her rear in its place. Next to the filly princess walked a young Princess Celestia. Again, the flowing mane that Twilight had always associated with alicorns was gone, now a common pink that matched her eyes. Without her cutie mark, her white coat almost vanished into the snow, and though she was nearly as tall as Twilight, her thin legs and slender body hinted at an adolescent youth. Both sisters were still alicorns, their wings tucked tightly against their sides, but this was such a far cry from how Twilight had ever seen them that she wondered if this was some trick. Had Luna's weird somehow taken control without her noticing? Was it trying to confuse her or distract her while it prepared to strike? Luna had come to a stop, staring silently into Twilight's wide eyes as Celestia kept walking. After a couple seconds, the older sister looked back.
Luna? What's wrong?
Luna blinked, looking away and bounding clumsily through the snow to catch up with her sister.
Just looking at the stars.
The wind resumed its pitched howl, lifting the snowdrifts and scattering them into turbulent eddies, and the sisters were reduced to silhouettes once more. They had spoken quietly, yet their voices rang clearly in Twilight's mind, as if they were her own thoughts. She was struck by how different they sounded. Celestia's voice was just as musical as ever, but lacked the deep layers of wisdom and gentle, motherly guidance. Luna spoke softly but easily, without the shade of regret that had always lingered in her tone whenever Twilight talked to her.
This must be a memory,
Midnight said.
Can we rouse her? Perhaps she can aid us.
Twilight shook herself, starting after them at a quick trot.
We can try.
A memory. A memory of when the sisters were foals, over 1,000 years ago by the time Twilight had been born. There was so much she could learn. About Equestria, about alicorns, about history. But no, she needed to focus on the goal. Wake up Luna, find the weird, and lure it out. She could ask the princess all about her past afterwards, if need be.
Princess!
Twilight shouted. Was she even a princess yet? The hazy shapes of the sisters stopped and stiffened as the wind grew stronger.
Luna!
As she drew close enough to see them clearly through the snow, Twilight skidded to a stop. The sisters were facing her with cautious expressions, their perked ears swiveling alertly. Celestia stepped forwards, standing protectively in front of Luna. Twilight beamed at the older alicorn, joy swelling in her breast. It felt like it had been an eternity since she had seen her mentor in person, and even though this younger, remembered form was so very different from the Sun Princess she knew, it still felt like a reunion. Celestia looked her over with a slight furrow to her brow, her ears pointed forwards attentively. Slowly, Twilight's grin faltered as she realized that her mentor did not recognize her. But then Celestia wasn't really here, was she? Luna's small, round face poked out from behind Celestia's legs. She looked up at Twilight with the same innocent curiosity as before, saying nothing. What should she say? Luna clearly wasn't lucid.
Where are you going?
Luna looked up to Celestia, who pursed her lips and answered in a clear but weary voice.
We're only passing through.
Midnight caught up, standing at Twilight's side. She looked at Twilight expectantly, silently bidding her to take the lead. Twilight frowned. She knew that this wasn't the real Celestia, but the distrust in her eyes hurt just the same. She took a tentative step forwards, forcing a friendly smile.
Can we travel with you?
Celestia narrowed her eyes. Her wings hovered off her sides, twitching anxiously.
It is best that you stay back.
Twilight winced. Dream or not, the cutting tone hurt her as if it were real.
We won't hurt you.
She tried, raising her voice to be heard over the howling wind. A thick flurry blew between them, and she lifted a hoof to shield her eyes.
We're friends!
Celestia shook her head.
We will not disturb you.
She glanced down to Luna, guiding her gently back.
Come, sister.
Twilight watched in dismay as Celestia turned away, walking deeper into the blizzard. Luna lingered only a moment longer, staring into Twilight's eyes, then followed her.
Wait!
Twilight reached out with a hoof, but the snow had already turned the alicorns into hazy silhouettes, and they showed no sign of stopping. She looked at Midnight, who arched her brow flippantly.
Shouldn't we chase them?
A sudden burst of wind interrupted Twilight's response. She cried out as she was knocked to the ground, the snow dancing frantically around her. A shadow passed overhead. A huge, white-furred paw dug into the snow beside Twilight. She yelped, ducking her head under her foreheads protectively as 3 more giant paws kicked up snow around her and cautiously raised her head. A great white wolf the size of a train car bounded across the snow, its lips drawn back in a snarl that revealed wickedly sharp fangs. It bolted after the Alicorn sisters with a vicious bark, almost disappearing among the white flurries as the wind built up into a deafening shriek.
Oh no!
Twilight climbed to her hooves, running after the wolf with horn aglow. Was it the weird? She hadn't seen any signs of corruption, but she'd only gotten a brief glimpse of it.
Luna!
Again, the wind struck her, tossing her sideways into the snow with a frustrated grunt. She struggled to a sitting position, squinting through the blizzard to make out the hazy shapes of the wolf and the princesses. She saw it pounce. The smaller shadow of the sisters was swallowed whole by the wolf's imposing bulk, but she heard no scream. Flashes of bright light bloomed like firecrackers, outlining the wolf rearing up, and the sisters crouched side by side beneath it, and then went dark. Twilight squinted into the snow with bated breath. The shadows had stopped moving. She stood cautiously, lifting a hoof to move closer. Without warning, the temperature plummeted. Though the blizzard had been freezing cold before, Twilight felt as if she could feel the last dregs of warmth physically ripped from her bones. She fell forwards, gasping for breath as darkness began to rush in all around her, stars popping and twinkling at the edges of her vision. She felt a terrible pressure in her breast, followed by 1,000 tiny needles prickling at her coat, and she wasn't sure if the screaming in her ears was the wind or her own voice raised in pain. It stopped as suddenly as it started. Twilight pulled her face out of the snow and shook her head, chest heaving. She looked to Midnight, who was lying on her side, clutching at her chest with bloodshot eyes stretched wide in shock.
You felt that too?
Midnight nodded shakily.
Such power.
Twilight struggled to her hooves before reaching out to help Midnight. The other mirror considered the offer for a moment before accepting, allowing herself to be pulled up. The wind died down to a steady but tolerable breeze, pulling Twilight's mane to the side as she looked ahead again. She could see the wolf clearly, lying on its back, with its legs spasming weakly above it. Its jaw was stretched wide in a pained grimace, revealing long curved fangs that shone like polished metal, its eyes sunken deep into its skull. It wheezed, its chest trembling with quick, tiny breaths, then went still. Celestia had fallen on her side, breathing hard but uninjured. And standing between them was the small, filly Luna, her eyes radiating a pale white light. Twilight blinked, looking between the little filly and the huge wolf.
Did she?
Luna's head snapped sideways, her arcane gaze glaring straight into Twilight's soul. She staggered backwards, struck by a sudden wave of hatred so pure, it felt as if she had been stabbed in the heart.
You weren't supposed to see this.
It felt like her own thought, but was unmistakably foreign. A shudder of fear trilled down Twilight's spine as she fell backwards, but this time the ground did not catch her. Instead, she kept falling, her stomach lurching and hooves flailing as a thick sheet of snow flurried around her. She screamed, her horns sparking to life as she sent out a frantic series of pings, but none of them came back. She tried to bend the dream to give herself wings, but it didn't respond. And when she looked around in search of Midnight, all she saw was the same all-encompassing curtain of fluttering white. Finally, the snow dissipated, and the roaring wind went silent. And Twilight gasped as she realized the true scale of Luna's dreamscape. She was falling through an astronomical abyss of incomprehensible proportions, a trillion pinpricks of starlight shifting like the dancers of some cosmic choreography in the infinite distance. Scattered across the abyss were... The first term that came to mind was islands, but that somehow seemed inadequate. But pockets of existence, where the infinity bled and twisted into a more recognizable reality, depicting 1,000 different scenes. She saw the castle of the two sisters in the midst of a grand conflagration. She saw snarling smoke clouds boiling from its towers and turning to starlight. A tree taller than the universe sprouting from a tiny seed, its branches falling and shattering. A pond reflecting the moonlight as a bearded stallion reclined in the grass, eyeing her with a warm smile. Mountains melting and sublimating into vapor under a blistering heat. Silver armor stained red with fresh blood as helmeted stallions marched within its reflective surface. She would turn her head from one scene to another and be filled with waves of emotion she couldn't explain, images of bliss and suffering flashing across her sight. She squeezed her eyes shut tight, overwhelmed by it all, but one scene lingered even still. A small island, surrounded by calm waters, and Princess Luna reclined on a cushion under a softly glowing flower. Twisting her head to focus on it, Twilight hesitantly opened her eyes. It was the same island that she had seen the princess sleeping on when first she had entered her dream. The still water surrounding it turned to stars around the edge, drifting across the dreamscape in lazy arcs. And hovering over the island, she saw Luna's weird, its blood wings spread wide and its ragged coat drooling blood from 1,000 wounds. The weird lunged, and a pony-shaped cluster of stars leapt back, dodging the pounce. the guardian that had stopped the weird after Twilight led it into Luna's sanctum. The guardian tossed its head with an eerie silence, a beam of starlight zipping across the abyss aimed straight for the weird's breast. The weird dashed sideways with an angry hiss, and as the beam seared past, it cut a wound into the infinite fabric of the dreamscape, a fresh reality bleeding out and taking shape. Wind pulling at Twilight's mane tore her attention away. She looked up and cried out in alarm when she saw a maze of rocky canyons hurtling towards her at breakneck speed. Her horn burst into light as she cast a quick feather fall, but even with the spell slowing her descent, she smacked into the edge of a plateau with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs. She yelped, bouncing from one side of a narrow canyon to the other, slapping face first into a cliff face, and awkwardly floating down to the rocky earth. She fell onto her back, chest heaving and mind racing, feeling very much as if she had just run a marathon across dimensions. With a groan of pain, she looked to the side and saw Midnight standing over her with a pensive frown.
Did you see that? Yes. All of it. I don't understand.
Twilight grimaced, climbing back to her hooves and shaking dirt and pebbles from her coat. She was breathing hard, after images of the starry abyss flashing at the edges of her vision. She looked up, spotting a sliver of night sky between the canyon lips where she had fallen through, but all she saw beyond it were twinkling stars.
That was Luna, but it wasn't. And she saw us,
Midnight said, scanning up and down the dark crevasse.
Yet we are not welcome. Did she not recognize us? I don't know.
Twilight shook her head, trying to dislodge the strange scenes. She felt sunlight on her back, and heard a cult's laughter, and tasted fresh blood pumping across her fangs.
It shouldn't be possible for her to be in two places at once, even in a dream. Dreams don't exist when the dreamer isn't there to see them, but look at this.
She gestured at the cliff faces in amazement. She could focus on each individual rock and pick out patterns in the stone.
So much detail. She is the Princess of Dreams, is she not? She may not have the same limits as a mortal.
Midnight frowned, stepping closer and resting a hoof on Twilight's shoulder.
Are you well? But how? Why? The last time we were here, everything made sense. It was one dream with her in the middle. Now it's like she's having 1,000 different dreams all at once.
The smell of moondust drifted across her nostrils. What did moondust smell like?
Are you feeling these too?
Midnight shrugged.
I feel everything you do. Do you need to stop? No, I think it's only temporary.
She took a deep breath as the surreal sensations faded, replaced by the scent of sand and the chittering of insects carried on the gentle wind that weaved through the canyon.
We should keep moving. We need to find a way to get to the center of this,
She paused, again at a loss for words.
Place.
She pushed herself into motion, simultaneously watching herself walk away through Midnight's concerned eyes.
Can we not cross?
Midnight asked, following after her.
We know where we need to go.
Twilight shook her head.
The dream isn't answering me. I tried giving myself wings when I was falling, but it didn't work. None of my techniques are working like they should. And Luna never taught me about anything like this. I mean, I've heard of recursive dreaming before, but this is something else. Not dreams within dreams, but dreams beside dreams. Parallel dreaming?
She pursed her lips, her voice trailing off to a thoughtful mutter.
And the solution is to walk aimlessly until we end up where we want? This is an exceptionally poor plan, even for you.
Twilight smirked, playfully flicking Midnight's nose with her tail.
Hey, it works in dreams. Usually.